Being a journalist is a challenging occupation in many parts of the world at the moment, and nowhere is that more true than in Mexico. Since December 2010, at least 11 journalists have been murdered in the state of Veracruz alone. Last month, a reporter covering political corruption for the La Union newspaper was kidnapped and later found dead. A police officer confessed to taking part in the killing and claimed the local mayor ordered his death. Joining us now from Mexico City to discuss this issue is our political analyst, Laura Carlson. Laura, welcome to the show. Why are journalists being targeted by narcos in Mexico?
Well, there are a number of reasons. First of all, ironically, the drug cartels are concerned about their public image. They're major employers in many communities, and they actually monitor the press to see what's being said about them. And primarily what they're looking for is to suppress any kind of information that is going to hurt their allies or help their rivals. They call the plaza the area where a drug trafficking route takes place. And one drug cartel strives to control a plaza. So when they have kinds of reports coming out in the news, they call it heating up the plaza. And what that means is they're rocking the boat. And this is the kind of thing that the drug cartels won't allow within the local press in particular. The other reason is that in many of these cases, we're talking about narco attacks on journalists, but we're finding more and more that in many of these cases, it's actually government officials that are attacking the journalists, like in this particular case, the first major case of this year with Moises Sanchez. And what has happened here is that a local policeman has confessed to it, said he's been ordered by the local mayor who was upset because the journalists and the newspaper were covering corruption. So there's an element of the state involved here, even though it is the state that is probably in collusion with the drug traffickers, that can't be ignored.
So journalists are ending up dead. Is this discouraging the next generation of journalists, young journalists in Mexico?
Well, I'm sure it is. There fortunately are many brave journalists who still go into the career and who still strive to carry it out. But for one thing, many people have been discouraged from taking on those particular crime beats. And they've also been discouraged by their media, by their newspapers themselves to cover these kinds of issues. There is a widespread understanding that the federal government doesn't want these stories about crime in the newspapers, in addition to the fact that it entails all these risks. There are a number of newspapers at different points over the past couple of years, and all of this really exploded since the late 2006 drug war was launched, that have actually publicly come out and said, we will no longer be covering the drug war. We will no longer be covering the criminal activities of drug cartels because we can't afford to put our own journalists at risk in this way. So the real purpose in a lot of ways to assassinate and to threaten and to attack journalists for the drug cartels is precisely this, the hopes that will have a chilling effect on the coverage that they don't want to see about something that's really a huge part of reality in many Mexican communities.
Well, how are these cases being investigated if the government is involved in some cases?
The sad and tragic part of this is that in many of these cases, they're not being investigated. And this is another one of the factors that create this extremely dangerous situation for journalists here in Mexico, and that's impunity, the lack of access to justice. In some cases where there's a lot of publicity regarding an assassination or an attack on a journalist, then there will be an investigation, but it usually comes up short even if it happens at all. There's a special prosecutor for crimes against freedom of expression in Mexico for over 8 years now, and when you look at the results of the work of that special prosecutor, they've done almost no prosecution. There's almost no sentencing of the criminals in these crimes, which sends out a signal to the drug cartels and to the corrupt officials that you can get away with silencing and even killing reporters throughout Mexico. So this is one of the biggest problems. There's a lack of investigation, either because the local police are part of the corruption, as in this case, or because they're afraid of the drug cartels who are controlling that particular area. And there seems to be all the way up to the highest levels, a lack of political will on the part of the government to really resolve these cases, much less prevent them.
Laura, there is a big presence of social media reporting stories that traditional media is not. Is that influenced by fear?
Yes, it certainly has been in some places, and particularly when you look at some of the very dangerous border areas, such as the state of Tamaulipas and other places where there's quite a bit of drug war violence. Now, these social media bloggers in particular are very, very important for people to understand what's going on around them in areas where the official and the local media have shut down their reporting on the crime situation. There's places where people will look to Facebook or to Twitter to find out if there's a shootout in their area and if it's safe to go, literally to walk to the local store. But there have also been some very famous and tragic cases of the assassination of bloggers who continued to report on the violence in their own neighborhoods, were threatened, continued to say, I believe this is my responsibility as a citizen to do this, and then later were disappeared and turned up murdered. And so, of course, that sends a message out to other people. There's still a lot of information that circulates, but the situation puts individuals in their own home blogging or putting out this kind of information at grave risk with very few mechanisms of protection.
All right, political analyst Laura Carlson, thank you so much for joining us from Mexico City.
America's Now